Marcel Kahn. I was born in December 1931 in the small town of Trier in Germany. We lived in a much smaller town called Nennischwies on the Mosel River, across the river from Remisch. Remisch is a city in Luxembourg, and I went to school for the first year at age 5 in Nennischwies, along with all the other kids of the town. I think I was the only Jewish child in the area, and hence the only one in school. Our family kept kosher. We would go to Saturday services, Shabbos services in Remisch. There were probably 10 or 15 people who would go, and always a minyan. They would always be there because it would be dependent upon them to make a minyan. I remember that we kept a strictly kosher home, bought kosher meat, observed Shabbos and Yontif, and that basically was our upbringing. It was during the time when Hitler was in power, and he made it very difficult for Jews. Now, as a child of 5, 6, and 7, it's difficult to realize what's going on, but when your parents tell you of the problems that they encountered, you later understand what that time frame was like. It was also exacerbated by the reading and the shows and TV and the history that tells of that time period. We were probably not adversely affected as much as the Jews in the larger cities because there were greater concentrations, whereas here in the smaller towns, all the little towns had a Jewish family or 2 or 3 or 4 living there, and to get a minyan, they would realize, they would ask each other to be at a service for a Yortzeit or ability to say Kaddish and so on. I realized that Reform Judaism got started in Germany, but that was not in the smaller towns, and hence anybody in the smaller community was if not totally observant, an Orthodox Jew. The Reform movement didn't get started until the 1800s and moved very slowly until probably after World War II when it really made its inroads. I do remember going to school in Germany, learning my A, B, C, D, and so on. And then, of course, the following year, we left Germany. This was in 1938, in June, to come to the United States. We got our papers in Stuttgart and then left Rotterdam, Holland, on the New Amsterdam in June of 1938. It was on the maiden voyage of that ship to New York.
Do you remember anything specific about how you were treated in school at that time? Or did you see anything unusual?
Nothing unusual, because at that time, anti-Semitism didn't get down to the first grade or kids that old. I had no problems, even though I'm sure some of these people realized that through discussions with their parents, Jews were an unwanted item, and but it never, I would not have known that had I not studied the history and realized what happened later. It's important to note, too, that it wasn't easy to leave Germany at that time. You had to have someone in the United States sponsor you, and we have an uncle, related more so on Ilsa's side than on my side, even though there's a relationship on both sides, who had come to this country and moved to Grand Island, Nebraska in the early 1900s. He was a very successful businessman, owning a number of businesses, and sponsored many of the relatives, many of our cousins, aunts, and uncles, and permitted them to leave Germany and come to the United States. That was quite an undertaking when you consider that he was really responsible to make sure that these people were not a ward of the state or a welfare recipient. And there wasn't one of the relatives who was not successful ultimately after coming to this country. All I think we really needed and wanted was an opportunity to get a job, to make a living, and to celebrate the holidays and our religion as we were taught.
Can we go back and just talk a little bit about the home, the house you lived in Germany?
Sure. The home, like most homes there, was a stone house with a barn adjacent to it. Animals were kept in the barn, and in front was the manure pile and so on, and that was very customary in those towns at that time. About 2 blocks around the corner, you would go into what we call paddocks or fields, and they were either for grazing or growing fruit, because I still remember picking pears and apples. And every home had a garden in back, because you just didn't let land go to waste or lie dormant. If it was utilized, it was good land for growing crops, you did that. It just reduced the cost of living. The streets I still remember, because I've been back since, were of a cobblestone, rather rough, and today they've all been asphalted and they're smooth, and even though some of the streets are not very wide, you can still drive on them, but they're certainly not 4-lane roads anywhere around there. I still remember walking on Shabbos, going over the bridge, over the Mosel River to Remisch, Luxembourg, with my dad for Shabbos morning services. And I don't know where the shul is, or the place of worship is anymore, because it's been probably approaching 60 years or more. But I do remember going there. One thing I remember is people there at the services wore hats as opposed to yarmulkes. The word yarmulke was strange or foreign to me until coming to this country. People in our area didn't wear yarmulkes, they wore hats. Always, obviously, and benching after meals and davening were all things that were familiar with our family, because it was observed. They did that.
How did you get along with your neighbors growing up as a child?
We really had no problems with neighbors, even though there may have been some latent anti-Semitic Nazis within the group, within the community. They really felt we were part of the community. There was no differentiation between our family or anyone else's. And interestingly enough, the school that I went to, the principal happened to be a priest. And I discussed this with my mother, and the Germans there would start the services, the school with services, with a prayer, with a Catholic prayer. And if you were not of that religious persuasion, it wasn't necessary to partake in it. And my mother makes the comment, and of course I have to accept her word for it, that there are many priests who acted as principals, who were not anti-Semitic, who accepted the various religious differences, and yet there were others who were totally pro-Catholic and did everything they could to foster their religion or religious beliefs.
Does the Kahn family go back many years in Germany?
My brother made an effort to determine just how far back he could find, and our family goes back in this area into the 1700s. Prior to that, he just ran into a concrete wall and could not go further. But and in other studies done by our relatives, they find the same kind of results, that we've lived in the area at least into the 1700s, and are not capable of determining where we migrated to or from. Ilsa had talked to one of her dad's cousin who lived in Milwaukee, this is many years ago, who said that he did a little study and he thinks that he can trace his heritage back to 1492, the Crusades of Spain and that time. So whether we're Sephardic or Ashkenazic, today certainly we tend to believe we're more Ashkenazic than Sephardic.
Let's go on then with your coming to the United States.
We came to this country, as most people did, through Ellis Island, remember that well, and I'm told by my parents that my brother and I didn't behave too well on the ship coming to this country, and probably that would include the time spent on Ellis Island. We were met in New York by cousins who came to this country the year before and lived in New York, and stayed there a week or so, and then took the train to Omaha, Nebraska. We arrived in Omaha July 4th, 1938, and my dad recalls the weather being so hot. How could people survive in this heat, he commented. And well, ultimately we've done so, but it's a lot easier with fans and air conditioning. We lived with cousins, the Levies, who had come to this country a few months earlier, and I remember starting out at Vinton School. And can you imagine, after going through the first grade in Germany, coming here, being placed in a totally new environment, new school, new language, and not being able to communicate? It's exactly the way it was. Teachers would talk, I had no idea what they were saying. It was ultimately, as kids begin to gain words and understanding through other kids, that after the first year, I was able to communicate a little better, certainly, but still not as much as I probably should have were I native born.
What grade did you enter when you came to
I
this country?
again repeated the first grade at Vinton School. Went to Vinton School for a year or so, and then in 1940 or so, we moved to 25th and Hickory, and I went, I think, second or third grade to Park School on 29th and Woolworth. And after graduating from Park, went to Central High from 1950 to 54, 1946 to 1950, and 1950 to 54 at University of Omaha. And from there on, I was totally Americanized, going into the Air Force after going through the ROTC program at UNO.
Did you get to spend any time at all with this relative in Grand Island?
Yes, we had, he lived there, and even though he was in his later 60, 70, and 80 years of age, when we knew him, he knew who we were. We would visit him, and certainly had to show our appreciation for what he had done for not only our family, but our total families, or mishpocha, and never once did somebody default on that promise to make good, and he gave everyone who came to this country a check for $50 to get started. And that was a lot of money in those days, and it was certainly appreciated. His name was David Kaufman. There are still stores in Grand Island named after him. He had a dime store, a theater, a bank, and so on. So I certainly could afford it, but it wasn't something that was mandated that he do. He did it out of the kindness of the individual's heart, and we're certainly today appreciative.
Did he have a family? Immediate family.
He did not, other than a wife who ultimately passed away, and he's remarried, but no children.
Is he still living?
No, he's been gone for possibly 30 years now, at least. But that's basically my story of coming to this country, leaving in 1938, and finding the country at least receptive to what we needed. The freedom to celebrate our religion as we were taught, and not fear from having to do it undercover.
Tell me a little bit about your parents.
Well, like most German Jews in the area, my dad was a cattle dealer and bought and sold cattle, and it wasn't done as it is today in lots of 50 or 100 or 500 cattle. It was done 1, 2, 3 at a time, and they were bought and sold, and you raised them and fed them and bought calves and raised them and then sold them when the time was right. And that provided a living for many of the German Jewish people in the area. My mother did not work in Germany, and of course when we came to this country, that was a different story. Then it was necessary to do so. It was difficult in 1938 for my dad, who spoke no English, to find a job, and he was hired initially by Parker Furnace and worked for Mr. Parker, Dave Parker, and got started. Then he became a welder and was able to do a little better there, and ultimately became a fuller brush man and sold products of his own, and then retired in the year 60, 65, and died at age 72 in December of 1972. My mother is 92 years old, will be 93 in a couple months. She's living at the Blumkin home and is mentally sound, and other than hard of hearing, she can carry on a pretty good conversation. And going back to Germany, I still remember in back of the house having what we call little vegetable gardens, and everybody had vegetable gardens, and that just augmented the supply of food that you wouldn't have to buy from others. I remember too uncles in the area who were shochet, plural, who would kill small animals, chickens, fowl, even goats would be a delicacy. And therefore you didn't need to go to Trier, to the kosher butcher, and so on. You were able to live off the land and do it very economically.
How did they preserve this meat?
To the best of my recollection, there's a pit or hole in the ground that was always cool, and meat and other products that needed refrigeration or needed to be kept cool were placed there, and the temperature in the area where we lived was a little different than here in Omaha. It never got as cold and it never got as warm. So you didn't have the variables that you do here, and refrigeration wasn't as acute. The need for refrigeration wasn't as acute as it is here in this country. And I'm sure Indians did the same thing by burying their things underground where the temperature was always cooler, and preserved it in that manner.
Do you remember much about how you were treated by your fellow classmates when you first came here?
Probably not too much, other than if they said anything to me, I probably couldn't understand them, and if they tried to insult me, I couldn't. It didn't sink in because I was too young and couldn't understand the language. But we were poor, and I'm sure that some of the clothes that we wore were not up to the latest styles and fashions, and there could have been some ridicule, but when you live under those circumstances, you accept it, and you don't feel bad about being ridiculed or made fun of, because there's not much you can do. You just accept it. But I know that from high school days, I've always felt it was necessary to work to help support our family, whereas other kids really didn't have to do it because their parents were successful. And when you think back, I'm sure that they too came from backgrounds similar to mine, only a generation or two before. And their grandparents also didn't have the silver spoon that kids today have. I'm sure today that my kids didn't have the tough time that people immigrating to this country did, and probably just read about it or hear about it, but never experience it, fortunately.
What did you study in school?
Well, I took all the courses that were required, of course, in grade school and in high school, and then studied to have a degree in business administration at the University of Omaha, and I think that has served me well over the years.
Tell me about your service time.
Well, I went into the Air Force, was stationed for the 2 years that I was on active duty in Albany, Georgia, Turner Air Force Base. And during this time, I got married to my wife, Ilsa, now 45 years, and then returned back to Omaha. I got a job at SAC headquarters, and also, of course, I had a reserve obligation, which I fulfilled at Offutt Air Force Base. And then in 1960, I started working for a group of doctors in South Omaha and became the business manager for a clinic there. I retired after almost 30 years of working at the clinic because we sold it to a larger group, and my time was done.
Tell me how you met your wife.
Well, that will take another hour or two, but we'll give you a brief discussion. Ilsa and I have relatives in common. I knew her and played with her in Germany, and even though we didn't live in the same town, I had relatives in the town where she lived, and when I would stay with these relatives, an aunt and uncle, I would occasionally see Ilsa. In fact, we have some pictures. Let me have them here, that I could get them. And of the two of us, when we were probably maybe 4 and 6 years old, and then we each came to this country in 1938. We came in June and Ilsa in August on the same ship, but obviously a different trip. In 1954, after graduating Omaha University, I went on a trip with my parents going from Omaha through Canada to New York, Washington, D.C., and back to Omaha. And while in New York, visiting cousins of my father, we met the Hessel family, and at that time I didn't know that Ilsa lived there. She did. And I met her again in 1954 after this hiatus of many years. I corresponded with her, and since the planes that were flown at Turner Air Force Base came from Long Island, I would easily be able to get there and back, and would be able to stop up in New York for long weekends and see her, and ultimately became engaged and married in 1956. And still married.
Same wife.
Same wife.
After you finished the service, you came back to Omaha. Were there a lot of changes at that time from the time you were in high school until then?
Not necessarily. It's only 2 years, and times were relatively good. It was maybe not the easiest thing to find a job, but certainly if someone wanted to work, you could get a job. And obviously, everybody who wants to live works for their money, and we were able to find a job, find work, and grow with it.
What was your job in the Air Force?
I served as a squadron adjutant, which is basically sort of a required type of work to make sure everybody's accounted for and sign the necessary papers. It was nothing that I really think helped me in the business world afterwards. It was something that was totally tied to the military and unique to them.
Did you go in with a commission?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
That had to be a far cry from a little immigrant boy coming here to being an officer in the...
The wisest thing that I did was go through the ROTC, because here's this just little Jewish boy who came to this country as an immigrant, getting a commission and be able to serve my country in that manner. It certainly beats having to start at the lower ranks and work your way up. I did leave the Air Force after 10 years of commission service, and felt that I couldn't spend my time giving it to the service, because there would go my vacation, and I thought that my family would be entitled to some of that time with me too.
Tell me some of the things that you did besides working during those early married years.
Well, I was fortunate enough to, I worked at the post office, which made it easier for me to go through school because the pay was good, and I had the postmaster at that time, John Hopkins, really had a liking for college students, and he permitted them to work like 4 to 6 hours an evening. It's sort of a win-win situation, because that's when the mail was the heaviest to move on, and it would give students, there were a lot of dental students, law students, and general college students who were able to support themselves from this income. And when leaving the post office, I worked at SAC headquarters for another year or so, and then ultimately became associated with the medical group practice.
How did you end up getting into the medical group practice?
A friend of mine was a part of the medical group, and he said that they've now grown in size and needed someone to do the business work for them, because their time was too expensive to have to hire and to do the billing and so on. And so he asked me if I'd be interested. I accepted and have never regretted it. I've grown with an organization called MGMA, Medical Group Management Association, which is a group of medical administrators who have formed a group to foster the growth and the personal development of group administrators, to make sure that they become efficient and they do things in such a manner as to be of greatest efficiencies in the operation of the group. And when I first started with this group, there were probably 350 members. It has now grown over to probably 35,000 various groups. Certainly don't regret joining that. I ultimately became a fellow in the American College of Medical Group Administrators, and that was probably one of my greatest achievements while working for the medical group practice.
It was probably very fulfilling, that type of work too, wasn't it?
It is. There weren't too many groups when I started in 1960, so you really were a pioneer in this field, and it certainly gave me the opportunity to grow with it, and it was very fulfilling. You try to run an efficient group practice, and I think maybe I did because I stayed around there for almost 30 years, and I don't think I would have lasted that long if I weren't doing something right.
And what did you do on the side to keep busy during those years? Anything in particular?
Well, I did do something other than try to raise two boys. I did some building. A fellow with whom I worked in the post office was quite a handy individual, and one day he took me over to his home and he showed me the remodeling he had done. And I've always enjoyed doing things mechanically and working with my hands, and I wanted to build an apartment, and he said he'd help me with it. And sure enough, in 1958, I built a 5-unit apartment, and next year I built another one, and the next year another one, and that kept me busy. I enjoyed doing that, but I didn't have a lot of free time. Not much opportunity to get into trouble.
So you enjoy working with your hands then?
Yes, just like a dentist does, I guess.
How would you sum up your life?
Well, so far I'm pleased with it, and I think that from my early beginnings, I consider myself very fortunate to have had parents with the foresight to realize the problems that were developing in Germany, and having the foresight to leave and to come to this country. And again, it was a wise decision, and certainly I'm grateful to it. I'm also grateful to this country for giving us the opportunities that it has. I think it's something that can be told 1,000 times by various people coming to this country, and I think we're all grateful that we live in the United States, a country that has given us as much as it has.
Do you maintain close ties with your cousins that came over at about the same time?
There were a number of cousins that came over at the same time, 1937 and 1938, and I think one came at 1940 or 41, just in the nick of time. And let me tell you, when there's a wedding or a bar mitzvah or b'nai mitzvah, we try to go to all these simchas, and we really enjoy each other's company. I think we're very close that way. Unlike some families who don't have that, I'm blessed with that. In fact, we're leaving again in May for another wedding, and we'll probably see many of our cousins there. Always look forward to that.
Now, the one thing we've left out is we haven't mentioned your brother. How did you get along growing up?
My brother is the one with the brains. He did well in school, and we got along well. We both had to work, and we did not have it easy growing up. But he still today studies a lot, reads a lot, and is a bright fellow.
I take it then that you still get along well.
Still, we have and still do.
Good.
He's coming here shortly, and I always look forward to seeing him.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This is a picture that Ilse drew up. The branches on this tree are reflect families who our uncle David Kaufman of Grand Island, Nebraska, sponsored to be able to come to this country. They include many cousins, aunts, and uncles. Many, of course, now are deceased. And the time frame is probably 1937 through 1941. These are families who lived in Germany, relatives who were brought to this country under the sponsorship of David Kaufman of Grand Island. He was a businessman, a successful one, who came to this country in the early 1900s. And Ilse drew the tree, and and listed the family members on there to honor David Kaufman for his kindness over the years. We also planted trees in Israel, and for every tree that was planted in Israel, he matched it and through his own doing, his own funds, and and bought additional trees to be planted in Israel. It's to this gentleman that we owe our lives. After all, had he not sponsored our families, I really don't know who would have, and we probably would have perished like many of our relatives did. This is a picture of Ilse Hessel, probably age 4, and a picture of yours truly, Marcel Kahn, age 6, in the town of Kaisers Esch. This is a town where Ilse lived during her first few years of life, and where I had an aunt and uncle. And when I would go visit them, Ilse would be my playmate. This is the same picture of Ilse and yours truly. It again is in Kaisers Esch. It's just a close-up picture of the same one we saw earlier. I'm guessing it must have been in about 1937 that this picture was taken. This is a top hat, which is very common in not only Germany, but in Western Europe, that Jewish men would wear during Shabbos and Yom Tov. And it's a silk hat. It collapses and used for that purpose. I don't know if it's used in East Europe or not. I know that this is one that goes back to probably 90 years. It comes in a box, which we'll show you next. There is the top hat that we saw just a few minutes ago. It is now in a collapsed position. By slapping it, it will pop up and become a full-size top hat. Inside the hat, incidentally, is a Magen David, or Jewish star, which indicates that it was used for that purpose. The box or container is that which will house the collapsed top hat, and it says on the box Hut und Pelzen werden, which means hat and furs, and that was the type of business. It also says Trier, which is the town where the business is located. It gives you the address of 5 Fleischstraße, which is the address, and you'll notice that in Leipzig, this store was begun in the year 1909. And also the name of the firm is J.P. Schmitz, with the telephone number right under that. It's something which Jewish men of West Europe wore for Shabbos and Yom Tov.